Good afternoon and welcome to today's sponsored content webinar with Dimensional Innovations. I'm Kara Dietzel, Vice President at NACDA, and we're glad to have you with us. Dimensional Innovations college sports practice is at the forefront of creating dynamic and immersive environments for collegiate athletics. Their approach combines experiential design, immersive technology, and specialty fabrication to enhance the spirit and pride of college sports programs. Specializing in renovation and new construction, DI's projects range from interactive displays and branded environments to comprehensive stadium overhauls. Their work is centered around improving the fan experience, boosting team spirit, and enhancing recruiting efforts. Current projects include KU's Memorial Stadium renovations, Furman University arena renovations, Iowa State Athletics basketball player facilities, United States Air Force Academy football stadium, and University of Minnesota basketball player facilities. Moderating today's session is Eric Buckels, an account director for DI, helping athletic programs navigate creating these experiential branded spaces. Additionally, Dimensional Innovations will be hosting a panel as part of the Division I Athletic Administrators Programming on Monday, June 10th at 9:00 a.m. as part of the 2024 NACDA and Affiliates Convention in Las Vegas, where they will discuss the emergence of mixed-use sports developments on campus. Before we begin, a quick reminder for our live attendees to utilize that Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window to submit any questions throughout the discussion, as we have a lot of time at the end to answer them. An email will be sent out later this afternoon to all registered attendees with a link to today's recording. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Eric.
Thank you very much, Kara. Well, great to have everybody here today virtually. Thanks for spending your lunch break or so with us. Today is just going to be a conversation with Virginia Tech Athletics, Brittany Lee and Brad Wurthman, about how we're working together to improve the fan experience at both their football and basketball arena from a signage, wayfinding, and branding perspective. I think our objective today is to give you a bit of an insight, not only what a project like this entails from our end as DI, but really hear from a partner in crime in the industry, from Brittany and Brad's standpoint, about what this initiative looked like from early ideation and now through the design phase, and as we head towards the football season from an execution standpoint. So we'll take a few steps back to start. Kara gave a great introduction about me, but also hopefully that is the most formal part of this webinar. So the rest of this will be pretty casual. So with that, Brittany, I'd love to hear more about your role, your title, and then a little bit about how you ended up here at Virginia Tech Athletics, and then we'll go to Brad.
Sounds great. Thank you, Eric. So I'm Brittany Lee, Assistant Athletic Director for Facility Management and Finance. I started with Virginia Tech Foundation about 13 years ago, and that's the nonprofit that supports us. It has our endowments, our scholarships, and all of that stuff. And then transitioned right after COVID to the athletics business office. My background and my bachelor's degree is in real estate and construction management. So once I started working here, I had the facility accounts, and Casey Underwood and John Boleyn kind of thought that my skill set was more fit on the facilities team. So I transferred over to that aspect and have been in that for about 2 years.
Great.
Hey,
Hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I excited to be here today. Thanks certainly for the opportunity to talk about some of our projects. My background, though probably boring to many, I started in the Canadian Football League and worked up there before moving into college athletics. I've had the privilege of working at the University of Cincinnati, the University of Illinois, and here as a Hokie at Virginia Tech. I manage our external relations team. So for us here at Virginia Tech, different than some, similar to others, manage our marketing, fundraising, ticket sales and service, comms, broadcast, kind of everything in that fan-facing or revenue-driving experience. So that's why I'm here today with everybody else.
Yeah, that's terrific. So today we're going to dig into some of the improvements we're making at Lane Stadium from kind of a branding, signage, and wayfinding standpoint. But before we dive into things that could be improved about Lane Stadium and your facilities, I want to start with the softball and talk about some of the things that are great. So I'll go first. When I was doing research for this, I spent about 20 minutes just watching entrances of Enter Sandman at night football games. So that was my preparation. So that's one thing that stands out to me is like absolutely, truly special, absolutely unique. Everybody knows it in collegiate athletics. So we'd love to hear just some things that you're doing absolutely great and that you're really excited about from a facilities or fan experience standpoint there at Virginia Tech.
Yeah, I can jump in. I say this to anybody who would listen, and I would say it even if I wasn't paid to say it. Night games in Lane Stadium are different, right? And I'm sure that's no disrespect to anybody in their respective school and their program, but until the short answer is for those who are tuned in, if you haven't been here for Enter Sandman before, let us know, right? Please make it, like, add it to your college athletics bucket list. We're happy to host. If you have been here as a visiting team, I really hope we sent you home very unhappy. But at least for pregame, you were probably impressed with how it went. But Eric, what you mentioned is pretty cool. It's, and I laugh, and this probably shows the seriousness with which our fan base takes the Enter Sandman, right? We want to be known for more than that, certainly. And that's parlayed itself into all of our fan experience. But guilty as charged. I thought that when I first started at Virginia Tech 7 years ago, that the fight song for the school had been changed officially to Enter Sandman. I was shocked to learn that there were more than one, and that Enter Sandman wasn't the only one that was assigned. So it's a unique place, right? Our longtime GOAT defensive coordinator always said that Blacksburg is a place that you don't intend to get to, and then you have a hard time leaving once you're here. We're kind of nestled in the middle of two major interstates, and you don't just happen upon Blacksburg, right? We talk about a lot that on game day, it's a 1-day vacation for people, and it's certainly a journey to get here, right? A lot of our fans come from out of town. There are expenses certainly that go far beyond just the ticket for the game and the corresponding donation to be in our fundraising group. So it needs to be something that lives up to the hype, right? And our team takes it seriously as well, that it's, with everybody's stadium, not just Lane, certainly this across the board, everybody in your venue, it might be their first time or their last time in your stadium. And so you don't have, well, I think we all know this, right? The beauty and the curse of live events, you don't get a do-over. There aren't preseason games. There aren't things that you get to try again. It may be the only time that somebody will ever be at your venue in their life. And I feel really proud of the people that I have the privilege of working with, that they take that to heart and try to do a great job for our fan base, and our fan base responds to it. So
yeah, it's great. Brittany, would you like to add anything to that?
I will echo what Brad said. Enter Sandman is such part of the culture here, and we talk about it in Lane Stadium, but when we hosted basketball, or when we host softball or anything like that, and the NCAA won't let us play the entrance because it's a neutral site, our student section especially knows every word, and they sing it. You can hear it on TV, you can hear it loud, and it does give you chills. It's electrifying that our players feed off of. And while we don't always come away as a win, our fans are always supportive and just have that as part of their culture and part of being a Hokie.
Yeah, right on. Those are two great answers. Okay, so we probably have known each other now longer than it seems, a year, 18 months, but you even came proactively to DI, wanting to improve some things from a fan experience and navigation standpoint there at Lane Stadium in the basketball arena castle. So would love to hear just about your viewpoints about how you internally were looking at your facilities and how to improve those facilities. Just kind of give us the behind the scenes to what got this initiative started.
Yeah, absolutely. So Brad and team told us that we're in a reseating year, and not only are we going to reseat, we're going to renumber everything so it makes sense, because admittedly it doesn't. We as a facility staff have a hard time, like when a fan has, an emergency, or there's bees in their section, or there needs to be a cleanup. The fan has a hard time telling us where they're at, so it makes our response time to get to them difficult. And just showing people how to get to their seats is hard. And like people that live it every day still can't tell them because it's backwards and doesn't make sense. So it needed to happen for sure. And ironically, we had done an RFP for graphics vendors, not for this project, but for another project on campus, and Dimensional Innovations was part of that. We're very thankful for their partnership. And Eric and I connected on a call, to talk about just what we needed. And I had heard tons of great things about your wayfinding and your graphics and all that. So he called me to talk about something else. And I was like, well, while I have you, sorry to disrail the conversation, but we need to talk about this. We're doing this. The timeline is like tomorrow. Can you do it? And of course he said yes. And we dove right in, and they've been nothing but excellent to push us to get them the answers that are needed. It's a lot of work, but if it wasn't for their guidance and them holding us accountable, we wouldn't be able to make it happen. And it's been great to work with Eric and his entire team.
Yeah, that's great. Brad, would love to hear your perspective too. I will narrate briefly before I hear your answer. We think about how signage and wayfinding are kind of the first step in getting the fan experience right. And then overlaid with that is branding and sometimes partnership integration. You made comments throughout last summer about how you're really intentional about first-time season ticket holders, new visitors to Lane Stadium, et cetera. So would love to hear you tie in that perspective as well when I hear about how this initiative started on your end.
Yeah, happy to. And I think there's, for those who are unfamiliar with Lane Stadium, again, the offer stands, right? If you want to come, just let us know. One of my primary responsibilities is to help us sell tickets, right? And I laugh, and our staff would give me a hard time and still do. There were times where, admittedly, walking along the concourse, as we all do, depending on time of year, I would hide a credential or put it down just in the hopes that nobody asked me how to get to their seat. Because even though my job is to help us sell our tickets and make our tickets make sense, the ability to direct people to where they needed to go was hard. And I use that as an example because, and for those who are, again, who are tuned in, from a facility perspective, right? Just like take all the fun away, and just from a wayfinding perspective, right? We're not talking about murals. We're not talking about all that. Our north end zone. So we have 4 distinct pieces: 2 sideline stands, 2 end zone stands, none of which are connected in terms of like, it's not a full bowl, right? So our north end zone is our one area of our students. All of those sections have historically been labeled as letters. Then our east stands, and this is how it was when the venue was built. Our east stands were odd numbered portals. So the sections didn't have portals, and they were a left or a right section. Our west stands were the same, but they were even. And then our south end zone was built later and was sequential 101 to 105, 501 to 510, and seats in corresponding 1 through whatever. Our seats on the east and west side go in even and odd. So you could have 4 seats together that would be seats 2, 4, 6, and 8. Unless you were in the middle of the row, and then those seats would be 1, 3, 2, and 4, but not in that order. So hopefully, again, in some very straightforward way, as somebody who likes to think that simple wins a lot of the time, the ability to tell our fan base that you can just count up from 1, and as long as you can do that, you can find your seat. Our hope is that it reduces the bulk of the questions that our event staff take on game day is, can you help me find my seats? And so the ability to remove that now gives us, hopefully the plan gives us the opportunity to have our event staff actually solve real problems, right? Instead of how do I find section 8, it becomes, hey, I've got an issue with this person sitting behind me or sitting in front of me or whatnot. And now we can deal with that and let the wayfinding do its job. Eric, you mentioned single game buyers. Excuse me. What we find, and this is probably similar to some stadiums, different than other stadiums. We've had a pretty consistent focus, especially over the last few years, on growing our lead list and growing our fan base, and doing that through single game purchases and first time purchases. So there are a lot of first time attendees in our games recently, which is, again, blessings and curses on all of it, right? If you're fully sold with season tickets, that creates challenges on its own, right? Finding new people and getting them in the building is a challenge. We were a venue that was sold out from 98 to 2013 with season tickets predominantly leading the way for that. That is not our current existence. And so we're working to get back to a lot of that, but it really is finding a way to move people through the inventory. One thing, and I would say this, it was really interesting, like going through the process with DI. all of that staff helping us navigate a pretty complex signage and wayfinding project. Again, 4 different distinct areas in our venue, all with different nomenclature, all with different wayfinding packages, because they were all done at kind of different moments in time and were built in that moment instead of one comprehensive program. The ability to do that make a really technical and really confusing process for me, right? I don't want to speak for Brittany, but a project that seems pretty heavy on the front end. It's been built to the point where it's really digestible for us on the ground, right? We aren't in the space of doing facilities projects, wayfinding projects every day. We are in the space of selling tickets and creating experiences every day. And so having a partner in that space has been helpful, especially as we work towards those first-time attendees having a better real-time experience.
Yeah.
And I can kind of echo that. Like, when we started this, myself and my team was kind of, we can do this, like, no problem. But the harsh reality is we're running 90 miles a minute, 7 days a week, from maintenance to projects. And while we thought we could do it, and we could have, having the DI team help us through it and do the bulk of, hey, we need this from you, has made this much simpler. Like I said, it's still a lot of work, but it also, like, we know our stadium, we're in it every day. So, like, I know how to get there, but, like, having Eric and team come in who have never been here before and try to get there is completely different, because, like, to Brad's point, most of our first time fans are going to be just like Eric walking in the stadium, and they don't know what I know. They don't know what we call the West or the North. Like, so having that outside perspective who doesn't live it every day was extremely beneficial, just to help people get from A to B.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's been a true partnership. Rick Smith, executive director at DI, is leading the design charge on this front. I essentially said, is there anything you want me to talk about on the client side about Virginia Tech? He's like, well, just tell them that they've been a great partner in this, have been doing great work. I was like, okay, well, that's not too helpful. But jokes aside, could you talk about, and we can go into the details here, I think it's a relevant webinar to do this, DI's responsibilities versus U2's and Casey's as well, in terms of, we're really into the detailed design programming phase, about to go into fabrication to be ready for football season. What does that back and forth look like on your end from kind of responsibilities matrix side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had all the initial kickoff calls. We had Rick and team come out here and do the audit, talked about the design plan and implemented the contracts, all of the legal official stuff. But since we've really been in design and moving to production, our project manager, Brian with DI, has set up a weekly call with Casey and he sends us an agenda of, hey, this is what we're going to cover. It's very specific questions. And he gives us a hard timeline of, hey, like, I need this answer by Friday. I need this answer by next week, and gives us, I like to call them small bites of stuff to work towards, because if we look at the whole package, it's overwhelming and entirely too much. But he sets realistic milestones, and when we can't deliver, he tells us what that's going to do to the project. So admittedly, there's stuff that we've had to say, okay, we're going to take that sign out of this package, even if we know it's going to cost us more later to get it. We can't get you an answer. And whether that's because we have limitations or it's something that campus has to weigh in on and we don't have time to get that approval, Brian and team are really realistic with, hey, this is what this is going to do to the project. So I say Brian gives me homework, and that's truly what it is. And it's essentially a list, and we email back and forth, text back and forth pretty much daily at this point, with answers to questions. And DI is great to do a lot of the work for us, but then there's questions of whether it's in our floor plan or we have to walk to the space and see, that we have to just provide answers back on.
Yeah, that's great. Brad, would you like to add anything from your end?
Not necessarily an add-on, but the one thing, and Brittany mentioned it, right? I think what's important is, again, like, we all have day jobs, right? In our respective campus, and we all know the drill. There are times of year where you're trying hard just to stay afloat. There are times of year where you can actually do some planning less, right? But the ability to have a partner, and this isn't stump speech, right? The ability to have a partner who keeps us kind of on track and keeps us aligned with, like, this, we all know the drill, there is an immediate need of what's the next event, what's the next program, what's the next visit, what's the next whatever brand campaign launch, whatever it is that's coming up. And then you hit July 4th and you say, oh, wait, we have football, right? Again, like now we have to ramp up. There's no way that we would be able to do that. And so having to everything that Brittany mentioned, having DI and the team there who they've been amazing. Having them help us with that project and help us with that process has let us major in the majors. And, you know, I mean, we are in our venue every day, which again, there's pros and cons to that. We do know where some things are, right? Like we take it for granted that we know the fastest route to get from the east side or the west side or whatnot. We know how to cut through different areas. The average person is maybe in your venue 6 days a year at most, right? And so they might know how to get to their seat and that's it. But the ability to let us focus on some of the, I don't want to say the bigger components of the project, but the very real, these are problems, or hey, these are great solutions. They don't work because of this nuance of our stadium. But can we find an alternative that would work instead of that? Because conceptually, we need it. I think that's been probably the most helpful, where we are less concerned with the fabrication process and the design process and more concerned with actually working on the real answer, which is how do we help people get around our stadium more efficiently?
Yeah, that's terrific. There's a question about timeline and budget. We'll answer that explicitly at the end, but to talk around it, so to speak, right now, it was probably last spring. So you probably gave yourself a good 15 months or so from engaging DI to when we're going to be installing later this summer. But I'm curious, maybe even before last spring, how you handled these conversations internally. No need to share exact budgets, but how you went about budgeting, and then always the kind of involvement of your athletic director and then relationship with the university are always kind of hot button topics during NACDA conversations. So bring to life kind of the internal, I almost said politics, but the internal conversations with stakeholders about how you got this project rolling before we came on board.
Yeah, so mine and Casey's involvement was Brad and team said, hey, we're going to renumber the stadium, like I said. And I think our initial thought was, okay, we have to re-sticker the seats and we need to change signage. And then it occurred to us how much signage that was and how mismatched everything was, and a lot of places where we don't have signage. Or we have signage that's not feasible, because like you can see it if I walk in the stadium right now, but you get a concourse full of people and it's not visible. So we had several meetings as a group to discuss how we were going to do this, kind of landed on, we need to hire someone to help us with this. And then we had the audit. And of course, then it gets into the political part of campus has to be involved. So we sent the audited package over to campus, and they have decision-making on anything outside of the stadium. So anything street facing or outside of the gates. Anything inside the stadium, we have delegated authority where we can make that decision. So we try to partner well and fit their brand standards, but essentially if they say, I don't like that sign in the stadium, we can override that and say, well, we're putting it out anyways. But there's the whole piece of this of, hey, like you have to get from your parking lot to the stadium. The campus has full rights to tell us we can't do something a certain way. So we had to get ahead of that very quickly, because that process takes time, just because there's so many stakeholders over there that have to weigh in. And through this entire process, we're like, how much is this going to cost? Trying to get a number so Brad can submit to our AD, and just played it by ear on that front. And like I said, we've had to concede some things and say, okay, we can't put these signs outside because we can't get there with campus. And we're still going to work to do that. But to make it by football season, we had to cut it out of the project because we just couldn't get where we needed to be.
Really quick too, I think it's important to note, like, and I don't know that I felt this way. This is honesty hour, right? I don't know that I felt this way, but we went through a transition with our concessionaire and brought in a new partner in that space. I don't mean that positive or negative. But one of the things that they really pressed on was, hey, we want to rebrand and do better signage around the concession stands. And it's really easy, selfishly, to look at that and say, do we really need to spend money on signage to just buy chicken tenders, right? Like, is that a thing that we need to do? And the reality is, going through that process with our concessionaire, being able to walk our concourse, our concourse looks completely different now than it did 3 years ago, largely because of the signage associated with concession stands. And it's so simple, it's brilliant, right? But it's also that signage isn't cheap. Like, the ability to build some of these signage and programming is not cheap. So from a budget perspective, and Eric, we can always get into that at the end. I think kind of like, if you adding a fresh coat of paint makes a house look different, and so having the ability to decide where you want to end up in. Again, remember that signage is not cheap, no matter what signage you're doing, but there might be ways, and one of the things, and Eric, maybe we get into it at some point in this call or separate, but I appreciated the intentionality behind using our existing space, and when possible, finding a cost-effective alternative to building from scratch, right? I thought that was really insightful. Again, those are things that we may not have been able to do on our own that y'all helped us with. And so working through that, in my opinion, has been really, really helpful. Finding the budget for it becomes, we all know the drill, right? There are significant financial pressures facing every campus across the country right now. Not that there weren't before, but there's a few really big ones also coming down the pipe. And so finding the ability to say, this is important because it impacts the fan experience. And it doesn't have to always be that you spend $500 million on a stadium renovation, right? I mean, that certainly is part of it, but we also, for those who have been involved in stadium renovation projects before, typically the signage is the last thing that people worry about, because they're worried about where do you put the club space or the suites or whatnot. And then signage is we'll just tell you where to go, right? Or we'll have an usher stand there and direct you. It's hard to have one usher who is trying to direct 800 people at the same time. So
yeah, no, a ton of great points, and I made it about 27 minutes without talking too much, but I will add a few notes there. One of which is, you're absolutely right. It's easy to jump, and we want to do it on this project as well. Talk about branding, photo moments, all that stuff that really is going to make the social media reel. Unfortunately, and I think it's fair to say this, signage and wayfinding is only noticeable when it's bad. You don't necessarily go to a football game and be like, man, what great signage and wayfinding. But if you got lost and couldn't meet up with your buddies and it's just a terrible experience, you're going to remember that forever. So unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, sometimes you just got to get the basics right and then build upon that. And I think we absolutely are planning to build upon that as we head into next season with storytelling and integrating branding, but making sure cohesive and seamless wayfinding is step one, is critical. And then to hit on two more points from a timeline perspective, I guess to just provide a simplified answers, I would say it's nice that we had a football season to work. So engaging us essentially 18 months prior, we get to work discovery prior to the football season, and then we can actually get on site for game day and do an audit in real time with fans in the stadium, take photos, experience it as it exists, let you all work during football season, and then we got back together after football season and dove into finishing design and then executing the work. And then lastly, from a budget setting standpoint, that's something that we help early on in the programming phase, right? Is literally counting how many signs, overhead directionals, bathroom signs, et cetera, and then talking about finishes and materiality. I remember the conversation that we had. We essentially had to get in budget, and we looked at overhead signs that are 30 feet above our heads. And it's like, well, this is a good example of, we don't need premium materials here because you're so far away you couldn't tell anyway. Let's save budget here, but keep premium materials in the suite level or at eye level, right? So those are the types of conversations that DI will have to get really tactical about blending scope with your budget as the end client. Real quick, and then I might bounce out just for some high level future facing questions, and then we can do Q&A. By the way, please submit questions. We can take this conversation off the tracks officially at 12:30 and talk about whatever the attendees are interested in. Talk about the basketball arena, Castle Coliseum, and why that was looped into this scope of work as well, because we're going to begin design and have that done before basketball season as well this year.
Yep. So Castle is different from Lane from the fact it is one concourse. It's a big circle and you can see one side from the other, but it is still numbered odd even. You go in and your seats are either odd even, but not when you're looking, when you walk in. You have to turn around and look at it from court level to figure out odd even. So again, I struggle telling people where their seats are. And you walk into a portal and don't know where you're supposed to go, and then the portal gets jammed up and everybody gets frustrated. Our concourses are also very narrow, so when people do get lost, it creates a lot of backup. So we wanted to number it sequential, just like the stadium, and our Coliseum is very dated. It's a wonderful fan experience, but it looks like it's old, so just updating those graphics and signage is important. And there's not a lot of signs as it is, because it is simple, but people ask, like, how do I get to first aid? How do I get to lost and found? And it's something, if we have, you know, a map when you first walk in, or at each north, east, south, and west that says, here's lost and found, here's the bookstore, it saves our security staff or our game day staff from answering questions and solving real world issues that they need to have their focus on.
Yeah. Okay, let's go out, maybe not so much specific on the signage, wayfinding, branding standpoint, but talk to me about how you make sure you keep your facilities, stadiums, arenas relevant amongst the ACC and just your competitive set in general. I think that's top of mind for everybody in this world, right? How do you compare yourselves to competition? What steps do you make so you don't feel like you're behind 5 years from now? All of those types of things.
I can give that one a shot. There are a lot of, I mean, not just the ACC, right? Across the country, in many of our respective roles, like you have the opportunity to go and visit colleagues and friends at other institutions. There are a lot of really beautiful venues, right? Like there are some really, really nice places out there. And so I think for us, at least, speaking only for Virginia Tech, we have to be intentional about what are our projects, right? And you can't, we are not in a position that we can do every project. So we have to prioritize what matters most. And is that, I mean, is that fan facing or is that student athlete welfare, right? Is it better to build a new end zone or is it better to build a better weight room? That's in the eye of the beholder, right? That's up to the school, that's up to your respective project and your athletic director and your program, right? And what matters. We are, you know, Lane Stadium, both Lane Stadium and Castle Coliseum, they are not new, right? They are, they've been around for quite some time. And they kind of, in some ways, they need some element of facelift, right? But does facelift have to mean cranes and construction crews and redoing all of it? Not always. Sometimes, yes, right? If that's in the cards for your organization and your school, certainly. If it's not, that's okay too. And so I think for us, again, speaking only for Virginia Tech, we just have to be intentional about what our roadmap to facilities looks like and what our projects look like. Probably like many either on this listening or participating in it, as you go through, you know, what does the settlement kind of become and what does that look like and whatnot. That, you know, there was always this arms race of, well, we have to have the best available facility. And a lot of that was internal facing, right? You had to have the best locker room, you had to have the best weight room, you had to have the best whatever it may be. Now, a lot of it, not, I don't want to say all of it, but a lot of it likely is forward facing. And we need to have more, you know, insert school X, you probably need, no matter what premium inventory you have, you could probably argue that you need more. No matter what opportunities for sponsorship you have, you could probably argue that you may need more. You know, there's probably very few of us nationally who are completely tapped in all of your areas with room to grow already built in, you know? And so finding that sweet spot for whatever your respective campus is and deciding what is a priority, I think is the most important part in that process.
Yeah, that's terrific. Your point about sponsorship struck a chord with us at DIs because, you know, Justin Wood leads our professional sports practice in general, but we're seeing the professional landscape from a fan experience side of things slide its way into the collegiate realm extensively, and sponsorship integration and how partnerships are integrated into a stadium, into an arena, and the fan experience is critical. So it's behind the scenes, but yes, we're starting with signage and wayfinding, but we're starting to program, or at least keep in mind that, hey, this X square footage or X overhead could be a partnership activation that's a sellable asset 18 months from now, right? So that integration and looking at your venue, yes, as an iconic collegiate facility, but also a professional lens from the sense of partnership integration is critically important going forward. I'm assuming we're going to get a handful of questions here in the next 5 minutes or so. So I might ask one or two wrap-up questions, one of which is, you're in it now, you've known DI a year or so plus, and we're about to head to fabrication. Other than saying you wouldn't hire DI again, what would you advise other people just about to start this project? What do you wish you would have known, et cetera, kind of lessons learned to date?
I think just knowing the time commitment that it's going to take of you, and DI helps tremendously, but again, they're not here. They don't have the answers. So knowing that you have to carve out X number of hours from your week, and I would say we usually spend about half a day on it throughout the week. Now that's not all, just like we don't spend Monday for half a day. It's an hour here, 2 hours there. We're going to lunch and we walk right through the stadium to count restroom signs, how many are men, how many are women. But it's just real time that takes away from our day job. And sometimes it's hard to fit that in. So you have to be willing to either A, sacrifice other things, or B, work over to make sure you get the answers. Because at the end of the day, we have to have this done for football season. And like, no one's going to care that, well, we had, a roof leak and a bathroom overflowing and we had 4 painters on site. Like, our fans are not going to care about that. They're going to care if we have a stadium that's halfway branded. So knowing the time commitment is a big thing. And then just making sure you have to just make decisions, whether you're not ready or you want 4 other people's opinions. Sometimes you just have to rip off the Band-Aid and say, I'm going to decide this. And you have to live with it once you make that decision. And we will probably mess up when we open. We'll probably be like, oh, this sign doesn't make sense. And just knowing that, to give ourselves some grace to be able to fix that later, and trust that DI is going to have our best interests at heart. Because they hold us accountable, they ask the right questions, they make us think outside the box, and we appreciate that. But sometimes it does make you feel a little uneasy that like a decision you make could affect an entire football game.
The ability to plan ahead is something that, again, I think we all try to do, and then you get in the reality of whether it's crossover season or whatnot, and we all know the scenario where you thought you had hours in the day and you don't. And so the ability to get ahead of this project has made it far less stressful than it could be. Like the fact that we're sitting here talking about it, right, on May 21st, the only reason we're able to do that is because we started doing this work with the help of Eric and Rick and team. We started doing this work months ago. And so now I have a ton of confidence that we will have this locked, loaded, and ready before anybody comes into our venue in September, because of the pre-work that went in, and it's to Brittany's point, a lot of the work in real time is heavy and taxing, not in a negative way, right? Like, you don't do this every day. This isn't a project that we plan to do every year. So the opportunity to make sure that we have that handled appropriately gives us the ability to plan around some of the things that might come up later in the process.
Absolutely. Let me pull up some questions. John, maybe towards the end, as long as it's okay with Brad and Brittany, I might jump in and show some images of the work that we've done to date from a design standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely.
Last question before I pull that up, and it can be broad. DI helped, but how did you go about budget setting for this, or allocating funds? And I'm genuinely curious too, how did you even come up with your initial number without engaging an outside firm? And I would advise to engage an outside firm, but curious how you went about it.
I think we had the internal conversation of, hey, we want to get this right. and we don't want it to look cheap. And we're only going to do this now. Like to Brad's point, we're not going to do this every year, not even probably, every 3 years. It's what we do now, hopefully works well. And we have this signage for a long time, minus updates or, sun fading and whatnot. So we wanted to put money towards it because it's important to move the project forward and for our fan experience. But Brad, do you have insight of how we came up with our number?
Kind of.
Yeah.
I keep going back to priorities, right? And what are you spending in maintenance, in regular maintenance of a facility? What are you spending in one-off signage packages that, in theory, you could just migrate that? If you look at what you spent in the last 5 years across your facility to redo signage and branding and wayfinding, and maybe that answer is nothing, right? In our case, it was not. And so we tried to look at it and forecast out and say, okay, based on some cost savings we have in some known areas, based on some additional opportunities that we're exploring, Eric alluded to it, right? Based on sponsorship inventory that we could make available for it, what does that look like for us and how do we get it accomplished? And so there's no, anybody here would laugh, right? There's no secret sauce to how we plan to budget for some of these projects. We all know on every campus, there are different priorities. There's different ways to spend money or to save money. And so finding a project that makes sense. Again, in our case, it was kind of a perfect storm of opportunity where we are reseeding our stadium. We do that every 3 or 4 years, both Lane and Castle. So we restack the deck, and based on priority points, people are able to choose new seats. This upcoming year, 24, is the first year of a reseat. So we were able to go through and say, we know where we're going to adjust pricing to grow revenue streams. We know we have to change the numbering of our stadium. That was really the impetus of it all, right? Changing the numbering of the stadium is what was most important. And once we got into it, we literally have to go out and renumber every seat. We have to go out every sign. And I kind of looked at our team, and while we're perfectly capable of going out and putting stickers on seats, and we will do that, I don't know that we are also incredibly capable of affixing all signage to the walls, right? So let's have the pros help us with that. And then once it's a priority and once it gets budgeted and approved for, that's why I would also say build in some lead time for it. Don't decide this. Sometimes we make decisions on projects we want to get ahead of now, right? This was one of those projects that we kind of had a ballpark idea as far as where we thought it would end up, and work towards saving for that.
Yeah, that's terrific. This shows the prep that we did here. Brad and Brittany, just confirming that you're okay with me showing the sponsorship master plan, or would you like me to show a different example?
No, that's
I'm
fine.
good with you showing it. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So this will be 3 minutes. So just to tee this up, this is the first exercise and deliverable that really sets the project up for success. This is all the conversations that we just had, plus a site visit and discovery, and then our design team really auditing, identifying areas for opportunity, and creating a plan of attack from what needs to be fixed and a prioritization standpoint. What you won't see when I flip through these slides is the next step is design of the actual signage schedule themselves, each individual sign, programming, placing each individual sign exactly where it needs to go. And then BI is a design build firm. So it is about to head to engineering and will be on our shop floor shortly from a fabrication standpoint. But this occurred. This is really putting me to the test with this number of attendees on here to share. Hopefully you can see this. This is essentially the output of our initial audit, right? So both facilities there mapped, starting to talk about our approach. So we talk about the build, the message schedules, the conditions. It could be a perfectly reasonable signage and wayfinding program, but it's just starting to get dated, right? Typography, context, how you're interacting with it, what that user journey is like from parking lot all the way to your seat, etc. And then our team really spends a bunch of time in the venue going through this. So I plan to write this up in a shorter, cohesive version that I can share to attendees, but some of the guiding principles is it needs to be simple, purposeful, timeless, and scalable. A saying that stands out that I think is relevant to signage and wayfinding is a true form of intelligence is being able to explain the complicated simply. And I think that holds true with signage and wayfinding is you don't need to share all the information at once. It just needs to be coherent from start to finish. And we're going into the details here, but we start to talk about iconography, messaging, thinking about how brand colors will fade and weather over the years, right? So Virginia Tech had some really great bold brand colors, but when that's in the weather, those may fade a little bit and be a little less visible. So our team suggested how to properly contrast branded or appropriate color schemes for signage and wayfinding purposes. Typography, they start to conflict with each other.
Really quick, Eric, I don't mean to interject. Can you just go back one slide, please? Because that might be my favorite. So when DI was here and did the audit of all of our venue, that first aid room is maybe my favorite part of the whole takeaway. There are 4, and it's nobody's fault, right? Like all of this was done with intentionality. There are 4 first aid signs that are directing you to that first aid room. That's one first aid room in our building, right? That's not even all of them. So I think that was, again, things that we take for granted that having an outside set of eyes helps with are moments like that where none of us, I don't want to say we hadn't noticed it, but we hadn't really thought about it until it was presented like this, and it hit all of us upside the head like, oh yes, we can fix this. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's great. You're starting to get the idea. Happy to dive into more details, but then we start to think about location and rhythm, how you're interacting with each touch point from parking lot to venue. And then you essentially create a hierarchy of signage and message schedules, starting from, like I said, entrance to seat. Last thing that I was hoping to show is, when we actually start to audit these spaces, right? Images, identification of what could be improved, talking through it, and then starting to lightly kind of program through gray boxes, opportunities for how to refresh the signage. And then this goes back to Brad, Brittany, and Casey, and then we essentially get to work through programming and design phase.
And I will say, during this phase, DI helped identify, like, we already put up flags in all of our parking lots that say, like, lot 1 says Hokie Club. Like, there's a gazillion flags. And they showed in this audit, like, what if we change that flag to say lot 1? Because that's what everyone refers to it. And it's something so simple that isn't really going to cost us any more money because we're already printing flags to go up there. We just change what a few of them or half of them say. And I don't think any of us would have identified those without DI's guidance, just because, again, we're here every day. We take it for granted, but it's something so simple that having them as our partners solved, like, people can't figure out which lot they're in. So it was great to find those small details during an audit.
Yeah. Absolutely. I may answer one more tactical question, then we'll essentially wrap it up. In terms of prioritization, it's hard. I would say a nice cutoff is to consider signage and wayfinding as directional signage and wayfinding as one bucket, and then branding or non-essential wayfinding as a second bucket. The question asks essentially, how do you prioritize overhead versus maps versus room signage? I would say once you make the initiative to do anything directional or informational, it's a good time to do it all, because part of the seamless branding, storytelling, et cetera, is having a completely refreshed directional signage and wayfinding program at your building. But it's totally appropriate to say experiential branding or placemaking as a phase 2. Well, with that, I think we can pretty much wrap it up. I'm always cognizant of folks that hear roles about Virginia Tech athletics or grow up loving college athletics and want to get into the sport. And I imagine we might have a couple on today. So I would just say, what are you excited about in college athletics for the next 5 years? And then just a piece of advice to, the cliche younger self or folks that are early in their career wanting to work their way up to roles like yours.
I'm deferring to Brittany first.
I think what I would tell my younger self is you always have to be passionate about your team, and our AD says this is home and we need to create memorable experiences for our fans, student athletes. but also for our staff, right? Like, we live here, this is our home. So remember that, like, we're all human, and don't lose the human aspect. Care about each other, and you create those memorable experiences for yourself and your coworkers, just as you would a fan or a student athlete coming in. Our student athletes are always first, but just take care of everyone and don't get caught up in the politics of it all, for lack of a better word.
What I'm excited about in our business is the transformation. You know, there's two ways we can look at it, and everybody has on the spectrum of, do you love change or hate change, right? Everybody's somewhere on that spectrum, and it depends on if you're the one pushing for change, right? I really love change that I think is worth it. I don't always really love change that somebody else thinks is worth it, but it depends on your vantage point. And so we have this opportunity now. You know, college athletics is a different industry than it was when many of us got into it, and that's okay. You know, I mean, find one industry that hasn't gone through major alterations to the way that they do the work, right? You look at the automobile industry, you look at the transportation industry, you look at the travel and tourism industry, on and on down the line. Every industry has gone through major adjustments over the years, and you know, college athletics has probably had a handful, right? And there felt like there's been a lot, whether that's cost of attendance or whatever, insert XYZ. But we're about to hit this major transformation, and we all have a front row seat to be part of the solution. So that's for me, right, two ways to look at it. One is we can either be mad about it and put our head in the sand and wish it didn't happen, or we can embrace the fact that it's happening, and we have a front row seat and a role to play in defining what that will look like for us and for our institutions. So that's the part that I'm excited about our business. I don't know what it means for what it looks like or what everybody's role will be moving forward. But it definitely creates an opportunity for people to add value and create value. You know, when I worked in minor league sports, my first boss said that you either save money or you make money. Those are the ways you add value to the organization. And so finding a way to do that in a new world order, so to speak, seems like a pretty exciting task. And then as far as advice, and you know, we have the greatest jobs. And it doesn't mean they're not hard. It doesn't mean they're not exhausting. It doesn't mean they're not long hours sometimes and programming. But I'd way rather solve our problems than try to do something else. Right. And you know, our team hears me say it all the time, and they would roll their eyes aggressively. Like, we're not curing disease, right? Like, we're not here solving how to fight cancer every day. So let's not take, it doesn't mean we can't take our work seriously, but let's not take ourselves too seriously. It's sports, right? Yes, it's high stakes, and yes, it's high pressure, and yes, it's all of those things, but it's also the job that everybody else wishes they had. So let's not forget that in the process. Especially if you're starting out, right? This is a different avenue. And so that's important. And then just the only other piece, and you know, it took me a while to learn, like, just be who you are in the process. There's no secret sauce. There's no, you are the secret sauce, right? Whatever your aspirations or your progression looks like, you're not always in control of it, and you're not always in control of your own timeline, but you're in control of how you act. Right. So just be you, and trust that people will appreciate and reward that along the way.
Yeah, that's absolutely terrific. Well, Brittany, Brad, thank you both. It's been great to get to know you throughout this project, and also thank you for taking the time out of your day to share your insights on this. A few housekeeping notes. I think the spirit of this was to talk about the actual work. It's fun to show end results and fancy photos, but what actually happens to get the work done. I will write up essentially the insights from that programming document and send out to the attendees, so you can kind of get a better perspective of the actual work process and best practices. This is for you, Kara. I'll be at NACDA. I think some of these folks will be too. So if anyone would like to connect with any of us, we'll be in Vegas in a couple of weeks. But otherwise, everyone who attended, thank you very much. Please don't be strangers. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Cool. Thanks all.